Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And right now, I'm standing in front of one of my favorite exhibits here at the aquarium. This is our largest exhibit that we have. It's our tropical reef habitat. And so that actually brings me to what we're going to be talking about today, the word habitat. We're going to be exploring some different habitats in the ocean together today. And so there we have the word for you right there, habitat. I'm sure you've heard of it before. And in case you haven't, or actually maybe you have, you can actually tell me what you think the word habitat is. I won't give it away too easily. I'll just let you tell me. So if you are watching this live and you would like to share any thoughts, comments, observations, questions that you have that come to your mind, you are welcome to text us live during our program at this number right here on the screen, 562-286-1838. However, if you're watching this at a later time and it's not 10 o'clock in the morning on January 2nd, 2024, Pacific time, then you can email us any questions that you have that come to your mind at the address below that number at live@lbaop.org. And then one of our educators will be happy to respond to you with any questions that you have. So, habitat, have you thought about what that word means? Well, it's a home for an animal, right? Oh, we've got some animals, right? Some of them are close to the camera right behind me, and some of them are a little bit farther away. But a habitat is an animal's home. And now when I think about the ocean, and maybe when you think about the ocean, what images come to your mind? Do you just think of, wow, it's blue, all this blue water and this big horizon that just expands, it just goes on and on forever? Well, it seems sometimes when you're at the beach looking out. Or maybe you think about other different parts of the ocean, because not all ocean habitats are the same. It is true that this is an ocean habitat, but there are many other exhibits that we even showcase here at the aquarium that, while they're ocean habitats, they're all very different types of habitats. Just like saying, well, we live on land, but there are different habitats on land that, even a person, you could live in an apartment, you could live in a condo, you could live in different parts up in the mountains, you could live out in the desert, I suppose. So there's different types of habitats. So that's what we're going to be exploring together today. And we're starting off right here at the coral reef habitat. So what I'd like you to do is kind of look around and see, what are the things that you're noticing? What observations can you make about a coral reef habitat? What is it that makes this different from other habitats in the ocean? So a coral reef habitat was going to look like this. So I'll back out of the way so you can get a better view of all of it. So what are the things that you're noticing? Well, I definitely see fish moving around. So I'm definitely seeing that there are fish that live in this habitat. It's a watery, saltwater ocean habitat. But do you see a lot of, well, sand on the bottom? A lot of big open spaces? Are you noticing rocks? What is this structure that's here? I mean, it kind of looks like rocks, right? What is all of this stuff? Well, some of it could be rocks, but then I also see colors. In fact, I see a lot of different colors. How many colors do you see? Do you see only the same colors? I see some yellowish color right here, kind of yellow and white. It almost looks like an egg, doesn't it? And then I see kind of this greenish yellow color, but I also see this orange color here and kind of a purple color. Here's some more purple, or maybe this is pink, a little bit more brightly colored things there. There's some purple there in the middle. But even down here, there's a lot of yellow and more of the green colors. What is causing all of that color? And what is all of this? Well, these, of course, I said it's a coral reef habitat. This is a coral reef. And a coral reef is made up of animals called corals. So believe it or not, they're not just rocks. They're not living rocks. What they are individual animals called corals. So if we were to look a little bit closer at the coral reef, we would notice there's lots of different kinds of corals, colors, different sizes and shapes. And so here's another exhibit that we have. And what do you notice? How many different types of shapes and colors do you see? Do they all look the same? No, there's so many different types of corals here. Some look kind of hard and stiff, like these right here. They don't seem to be moving very much. They kind of look kind of fingery, like coming up with all these kind of rounded off tops. But then I also see this right over here. It's kind of moving around. There's a lot of motion here, probably because there's some water flowing through it. So the water is making its move. It's not actually the animal itself reaching out and trying to grab things, but it is much more, it's much softer. So this is a soft coral, and then we've got our harder corals, which are the ones that make the coral reefs. Now, all of these, there's some little skinny things sticking up, some kind of branch out, this almost reminds me of lettuce in a way, and then sometimes there's some that even look like brains. So we'll have to keep our eyes open and see if you see any unusual shapes in here. But what do you think it would be like to live in a habitat like this? First of all, what do you think the temperature of the water is? Do you think it's going to be really warm, or do you think it's going to be really cold? Well, coral reefs, because of all those bright colors that you see, most likely they're going to be up near the surface, getting lots and lots of sunlight, and lots of sunlight helping them to grow and be beautiful, but also it's going to give them some warm water. So coral reefs live in warm tropical areas around the equator. So this is not the type of water we would have off our coast here in Long Beach, California. Our water temperatures are much cooler, but coral reefs live in much, much warmer water. And you can see a lot of different animals that live in this coral reef. Are you noticing any really large animals swimming through here, or do they look kind of small to you? I'm noticing that they're pretty small, but also look at the shape. Even this fish right here, from the side, it looks kind of big and kind of wide, but look at what happens when it turns and swims away from us. Did you notice how skinny it was? So these fish, a lot of what we're seeing here are what we call compressed shaped fish, which means that if you were to take your hands and clap them together like this and kind of swim at you, this would be a compressed shape. Whereas on the side, it might look a little bit bigger, but when it turns towards you, it's very skinny. It's flattened from side to side, which is different from some other fish. So if we were to go out into a different type of habitat, and so these little coral reefs and all these little things sticking up, we might find more of these more rounder shaped fish, or kind of fusiform is what we call it, ball shape. So ball shaped fish that might live in an exhibit or in a habitat, like this one. Now, how does this look different from the coral reef habitat we were looking at? Is this a coral reef? Is that what we're looking at here? Are these corals? Well, what do you think this is? It seems to be growing up from the bottom, also reaching to the sunlight, because look at this. It looks like there's a lot of rays of sun. Do you see that sun shining through? Yeah, so this is obviously an organism that needs some sun too, but I don't see all the bright colors of the coral reef. Now, maybe if you live around here, you've seen some of this washed up on the beach before. But this habitat is different. This is a kelp forest habitat. And so here's a view of one of our exhibits here at the aquarium, our Blue Cavern exhibit. And this is a view up at the top looking down. So imagine that you're out on a boat in the ocean right here off the coast of Southern California. And you decide, I'm going to take my mask, so put your mask on, and I'm going to look in the water. What does it look like down there? Well, this is what you might see. So let's look from the top. So if we were sticking our head over the edge of the boat looking down, this is what we'd be seeing. Now, how does this look different than what we were looking at before? Well, do you see the kelp? Yeah, the kelp is all this that's growing up. And what is the kelp holding onto here? Yeah, it's holding onto this big rock. Well, let's take a closer look at that kelp. So I have here some of the artificial kelp that we use in some of our exhibits. And this is what kelp looks like. Again, maybe you've seen this washed up on the beach. There's some interesting things to notice about the kelp. First of all, it has these long things that look like, well, like leaves on a plant. And just like leaves on a plant are green, this looks kind of like a greenish color too. And those green leaves have something called chlorophyll in them that's getting the sunlight. Remember, we saw all those rays that are coming down of the sunlight into the ocean? Well, it's getting those rays and it's creating food for the animal, for the organism. So the kelp itself is providing its own food. It's not an animal, but it's not a plant, it's an algae. But it is making its own food using the energy from the sun. and it's creating oxygen for us to breathe as well as oxygen for the animals in the ocean to breathe. Because maybe you didn't realize this, but animals like this giant sea bass here and these other fish that are swimming around in the water, they need oxygen too. Now you may have thought, wait a minute, I thought they breathe the water and we breathe air with lungs. You're correct. We breathe the air. And guess what's in the air that we need? Oxygen. So we get oxygen from the air and we breathe it into our lungs. But you're right, because these fish do breathe water. But do you know what water is made out of? It's got oxygen in it too. And so these fish are getting the oxygen out of the water and they're using their gills to breathe it in. So they're getting, just we get oxygen from the leaves, the plants that are out on land, they're getting it from little plants that are in the ocean or algae like giant kelp here that is going out into the ocean so that they can breathe the oxygen. So these animals that are living in the kelp forest habitat are breathing in oxygen that can be created by the blades of the kelp. So these are the blades, but notice what's attached to this blade. You see this kind of funny bump down here? Well, this bump is full of gas to help it to float, like having like a little balloon attached to them or putting floaties on in the water to help you stay floating. That's what kelp has to help it reach up to the surface of the water and capture the sunlight from the surface. So these help it to float. These blades help get the oxygen from the water, and they also get nutrients from the water. But down at the very bottom of the kelp, they have this thing right here. It kind of looks like roots, like plants have, that help get nutrients from the soil and help hold them in place. But these will actually just help them hold on to something. So it can hold on to a rock. So I'm going to go over to my document camera. If you want to look over here, I have, whoops, these are some corals actually. But I'm going to replace these corals with this. This is called a holdfast. So this is what's on the bottom holding the kelp in place in the kelp forest. Now, this is just a portion of the holdfast. So the kelp would have been growing up here from the top. But let's look a little bit closer. Give it a chance to adjust. Oop, maybe that's a little bit too bright. I was hoping I could point out this little kind of white thing right there. Can you tell what that looks like, or what does that look like to you? Maybe it's easier to see when it's farther away. Do you see how there's kind of ridges in it? Looks like that's part of the shell. In fact, the kelp forest holdfast, the holdfast at the bottom of the kelp, can hide lots of different animals. So there might be snails that could be hiding in here, little tiny crabs. So even though the picture we were looking at before was the whole habitat, even within that whole habitat, there can be other things that can become a habitat or a home for animals. There could be worms that live in this and all these little places. And all these little things are just helping the holdfast stay in one spot so it doesn't float all over the ocean. But it is important to have those rocks down at the bottom to help them hold on, just like we saw in our habitat. So here's a great picture right here of a holdfast. So here we have the holdfast holding on to the kelp is growing up from the holdfast. So look at how big that is. What does it remind you of? It kind of reminds me of a big plate of spaghetti, just maybe a different color. But look at them. They look like noodles, and they do a great job of holding that kelp in place so we can grow up nice and tall. Imagine if you were kelp. Well, if you were kelp, you would have to get new clothes almost every day. You know why? Because we grow, you're probably growing pretty quickly, but not as quickly as kelp. Kelp grows up to 2 feet in one day in the right conditions. So this kelp that's growing here, that you see it's growing up all the way up to the surface, well, when it started, it was down here, but it was growing 2 feet every day in those right conditions, getting all that energy from the sun, all the sunlight. But look at it. Now, if we lived in this sort of habitat, even though it's still getting lots of sunlight going up to the surface, it's actually a little bit colder water. So the water here off our coast in Southern California is a lot colder than what you would find in the tropical coral reefs. So if we lived here, we'd probably want to have a nice layer of fat on us, really. So some animals that live in a kelp forest have ways of staying warm, like blubber. And now here is a really cool video. I actually haven't even seen this before. And it might be hard to tell. Do you see any animals that are living in here? Look at all the stuff that's waving around. I have a feeling that's not the holdfast. So I think there's something coming out of this holdfast that's moving around and hiding in that holdfast. Could those be arms of brittle stars, maybe? Do you know what a brittle star is? A brittle star is a type of sea star, or you might think of them as starfish. We call them sea stars because they're not really fish. They don't have fins to swim around or bones like other fish have. They're just stars in the sea, so we call them sea stars. But yes, they are animals. And brittle stars are known for having really long, skinny arms, and they do break off really easily, which is why they're called brittle stars, because brittle means it can break really easily. So anyhow, that's kind of neat to see that there might be some little arms sticking out there, or they could be some, maybe even worms. I don't have a great view from what I can see right now. Maybe you can see better than I can. But it's neat to see and inspect and look very carefully at this holdfast. So here's a holdfast of the kelp forest. But like I said, if we were to live here, we would have to be able to maneuver ourselves between all that kelp. It could probably be hard to swim through there. But there are some animals that are pretty gifted in swimming. How would you swim if you were having to swim through this kelp or through this kelp forest? Well, you'd probably have to be very easy. You have to have a very flexible body to help you move through. We're kind of awkward sometimes when we're swimming, but let's see if we can see any animals in here. Oh, I see some animals. Do you see them? What kinds of animals are those? Yeah, these are sea lions. Now, maybe you thought seal, but I'll give you a hint how you know that they're sea lions instead of seals. Look at how they're swimming. What fins are they using? Well, they're using flippers, I should say. They're front flippers, and they're really, really big front flippers. They're moving to help them push themselves through the water, and then, oh, look at how cute they are. And look at how flexible their bodies are and how easy it is for them to move through the kelp. Now, the other way you can tell that this is a sea lion and not a seal is because they have ears that are sticking out from the side of their head. Do you see their ears sticking out? Yeah, that's how you know it's a sea lion, because sea lions have outer ear flaps that stick out. Just like we have ears that stick out from our head, they have, here's a great picture. Right here, this is an ear, and that is an ear, and we call those ear flaps because these are both California sea lions. And notice this one has a big bump on its head. That's because that's a fully grown adult sea lion. That's a male. And male adult sea lions have a bump on their head called a sagittal crest. So you can tell them apart. They get a little bit bigger than the females, and the females don't have the bump on their head. But this one is a fully grown adult male with the bump. When they're younger sea lions, younger males don't have that either, but fully grown adult ones do. So, I'm sorry, fully grown adult males do. So thank you, Sarah, for bringing up this picture. Sarah is in here helping control all the things that you're seeing on the screen and controlling all the images that are behind me. So thank you, Sarah, for helping out in the studio here. Now, okay, so these are California sea lions that live in a kelp forest habitat. We saw some of the other animals that lived in the kelp forest habitat. We've looked at some of the corals and the coral reef habitat. What's another ocean habitat you can think of? Or do all other parts of the ocean look the same? They either have kelp or they have coral. Well, maybe we can look at a different habitat and we'll just kind of make some observations about what types of things we're noticing. Now, it could be a habitat like this. Now here we're looking above the water at it, which is kind of cool. So this is something that could be exposed, right? So if we look out, I know a lot of times this is what we were thinking of, right? We think about the ocean. Look, it's all flat. And so it's all the same, right? It might look the same on the top, but then going below the surface is where we see those differences, like a kelp forest or. But now also think about this area. It's close to shore. And this is a very unique habitat right here, because we also have rocks, like we saw rocks that were in our blue cavern exhibit or our kelp forest habitat. So we said the rocks were important for helping the kelp to grow. But do you see anything growing or living on these rocks? Well, actually there is something, but you might have to take a closer look to see what it is, but I also want you to notice that there are pools of water. Does it look like this is really deep water right here? Like if you step in, you're just going to go woo, way over your head? No, this is shallow water. So it means it's also getting lots of sunlight. But let's take a closer look at what might be living in the pools of these water and think about what kind of habitat it might be. Ooh, look at all the colors here. What types of things are you noticing? Do you recognize anything in this? Because this would be in a shallow pool of water in what we call a tide pool. Now, why is it called a tide pool? Have you ever heard of the tides before? The ocean tides, or a high tide or a low tide? Well, the tides are the movement of the water coming into land and then moving away from land. And so it's getting closer and then farther away. And as we're looking at this, this is an environment that's always changing. Every time you look at it, a different time of the day, it might look a little bit different because the water level might be high if it's high tide, and then it goes down to low tide. So twice every day, you're going to get a high tide and a low tide. And if it's high tide, that means that these animals, they're all covered with water. But sometimes at low tide, animals are exposed, and they might look a little bit different. So notice this animal right here. Do you recognize this? Now, maybe if you've seen Finding Nemo, maybe you're familiar with this. This is called do you know? Anemone. So an anemone is an animal that doesn't look like your typical animal. It looks more like a flower, really, but it is an animal. And it has all of these crazy things on the outside of its body. What are those things called? Do you know? Yeah, those are tentacles. You can actually make your own little anemone with your hands. You put your arms together like this and wiggle your fingers like this. You made your own little sea anemone. All those little wiggling fingers are their tentacles. So here we can see all the tentacles around the sea anemone. But now I said this is an animal, so it needs to have a mouth. Where do you think the mouth of the sea anemone is? That's right, right in the center. So there's the mouth. What color is the mouth here? Looks like the center of this anemone is kind of a yellow color. And its tentacles, they're a different color, aren't they? Yeah, they're white. And then probably if we could see down here and more of the body, like this part, or the column or the mantle of the sea anemone, looks kind of a reddish, pinkish color, doesn't it? So anemones can be really beautiful in and of themselves. Even notice those little stripes that are inside of them. It's kind of neat. It's like pointing the way, like this is where you want to come, into my mouth. They're pointing the direction right into the mouth, into the belly of the sea anemone. So this is what you might see when it's open and it's searching for food. It's waiting for food to come to its body. Because do you think these animals walk around a whole lot? Do you think they go around looking for food? No, but they still need to eat food. But they stay in one place. So they have one big foot that they pop into one spot, and they kind of wait for things to swim on by their tentacles. And then you know what's really special about the tentacles? They have stinging cells. Now that doesn't sound very friendly, does it? But it's what they use to help them grab their food. And so the tentacles, you can see they're very floppy. They kind of move around as the water is flowing. But as soon as something brushes up against them, it will sting it and allow it to grab its food so it can pull it into its mouth. Now, when it's open and searching for food like this, that's one thing. But if the tide was to go down and they were going to be exposed and out, not in the water anymore, what do you think they would do? Do you think they would look just like this? Well, they're going to want to try to conserve their water, right? Because their body is mostly water, and they don't want to dry out in the sun. So if you were like this and you decided, I want to protect myself from the sun, you probably wouldn't lay out on a towel like this, say, okay, I'm protecting myself from the sun this way. No, you'd probably want to, put some shade on you, kind of cover up, maybe huddle down so that the sun isn't beating on you. Well, that's what you're going to find in a tide pool at low tide. These right here are anemones. Wow, they look a lot different than the other ones, don't they? You don't see all those tentacles sticking out. They've kind of hidden them down inside, and they've kind of closed up so we can see more of the mantle. Now, did you notice that there's also these little specks on them? These little specks are like little pieces of shells and rocks and things that they'll hold on top of them to help them camouflage and blend in and maybe offer a little bit more protection from the sun. So that's what you see. They almost look like squishy rocks. So if you go to a tide pool and it's at low tide, be very, very, very careful where you step. well, even if it's any tide, you always want to be looking to make sure you're not stepping on little animals like this. Because these little sea anemones, they'd be very, very squishy, and they're not very obvious because they camouflage so well. Look at how well they blend into the rocks. Did you notice some other animals here, though, in the tide pool? Absolutely. What are those? Sea stars, or you may have said starfish. So these are ochre sea stars, and you can tell they've got some of that white coloring on them that kind of breaks up them and helps them to camouflage a little bit. When I say breaks them up, I don't mean makes them come apart, but I mean it kind of makes it harder to see their outline of their body because you're kind of distracted by all these other colors. So it's really neat to see the designs of the animals that live in the kelp forest, or sorry, in the tide pool and in the ocean, and how those designs help them to survive really well in that habitat. So here's another down here. Well, this is a pretty neat habitat. Like I said, this is low tide, so that means the water has kind of gone back out into the main parts of the ocean and is exposing some of these animals. So these are all pretty hardy animals. They can handle those waves crashing over them and coming in and out and sometimes being exposed to the sun, but not every animal can handle this. Some animals might live out in the open ocean where there isn't a whole lot of things to hold on to. They don't have sticky feet to help them stick to the rocks. Imagine if you were out in the open ocean where there's not much to see around you, you'd probably see a whole lot of blue. What would you want? What would you want to have to help you survive in that type of habitat? Would it really help you to have sticky feet? Probably not. What would you want to do? Say that you were going to go out to the ocean and I said, I'm going to put you out in the ocean for 3 hours. Go ahead, have fun. Is there anything you'd want to have with you as you're out in the ocean? Are you going to be able to get around really well? What would help you survive? Or what would help you enjoy yourself more if you were going under? Well, obviously, if you had a snorkel, you could breathe, you could stay at the surface, you can still be looking down the sun, or looking down from the surface and breathing still, that'd be great. But also to help you move through the water, what would that be? What would help you? Well, maybe you're a good swimmer already, but if we could be a little bit more like the fish or some of the animals that live in the open ocean, we might get some fins to help us move. So those animals that live in the open ocean, oftentimes you're going to see them with nice fins and things to help them move through that water. They might be a little bit bigger in size than some other animals. You might also be very streamlined. Look at the shape of this blue shark right here. Look at how streamlined it is, almost like a torpedo to help it get through the water very quickly. And look at the coloring around it and the coloring of its body. As I mentioned, it's a blue shark, and I'm noticing a lot of blue all around it. In fact, everywhere I'm looking right now, I'm pretty much seeing blue. I can see the surface up here, but there's not a whole lot of places to hide in the open ocean. So this animal is relying on its streamlined body to help it move through that ocean, but also helping it blend in by using camouflage. And the type of camouflage I'm talking about is what we call counter shading. So counter shading is when an animal is darker on the top and lighter on the bottom. Did you notice that? See how the snout and the underside of this animal is a lot lighter in color than the top side? Well, that's because it helps it to blend in. Because look at the picture. At the top of the picture, is it lighter blue or darker blue up here? Yeah, I see a lot of the light blue color. But then as you go deeper, what do you notice at the bottom? Yeah, a much darker color. And you might think, well, then why isn't it darker color on the bottom and lighter on the top? Well, because if you were in our boat looking down from the surface, it's going to look really dark down at the bottom of the ocean, right? And so if an animal is dark on the top, if we're looking down at them and they have a dark top, they're going to blend in and camouflage with the dark ocean bottom. But now let's pretend we get our snorkel gear on, or maybe go scuba diving, even better. And then we put our air tank on, we get underwater, and we're way down, we're exploring the bottom of the ocean. Well, say you get down to the bottom of the ocean, you're on the sand, and then you look up way at the surface of the ocean to see what's above you. You're going to see all of the light color up here. You're going to see the rays of the sun coming in. Well, if an animal is swimming by and it's white and light on the bottom side, it's going to blend in and camouflage easier to the rays of the sun. So this is very common in animals in the ocean to see them with this counter shading, darker on the top, lighter on the bottom. So living in the open ocean can be very different types of adaptations compared to animals that live in the kelp forest or animals that live in a coral reef or animals that live in a tide pool. So no matter where you go, whatever part of the ocean you're looking at, recognize that there are differences. And if you look carefully, you'll find different animals living there with very different adaptations. So I hope that you have enjoyed exploring some different ocean habitats with me today. And here's another view of what kind of habitat do you think this is? Yeah, I'm noticing some kelp. So this is kind of like a kelp forest habitat. And there's some really neat animals swimming in here. But thank you so much for joining me today. Enjoy the rest of your day. And again, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email us at any time. We'd be happy to hear from you. All right, have a great day, everyone. Bye.